everyone, it's Stacey. This is part B of my Christmas tree skirt tutorial, and if you find this tutorial useful and you'd like to see more, please make sure you subscribe and hit the bell button so you get notified every time I do a new video. But for now, let's finish off making our Christmas tree skirts. Okay, I've got my backing all spread out with the right side facing me, and then underneath I have my batting. So what I did was I put it out and I spread it out nicely, then I put my backing on top with the right side facing me and I smoothed it all out. Then I'm going to take my Christmas tree skirt with the right side facing down, and I need to spread that out all nicely so it's nice and smooth. Okay, so now that it's all spread out, that did take a little bit of work, so just take your time. I did find it helped sort of pulling out on the edges, on the joins here, and just making sure it was really pulled out and smoothed out. So once you're happy with that, what we're going to do is pin it in place so we can sew around the edges. So I'm going to start here, and then we are going to pin up where we've got our opening. We're keeping that opening for now. Now on one side, we are going to do some buttons, and that's optional. So we need to leave an opening to turn it right sides out, but we also want to leave an opening so we can do our buttons. So depending on what side you want to do it on, I'm just going to mark it now. I'm just going to put 2 pins at the top and at the bottom, and then when I sew, I'm going to leave this whole side open to do my buttons. Now I'm just going to go around and pin the rest. So now I've finished pinning around the whole edge, and like I said, I've pinned 2 here and 2 here, knowing that this is going to be my opening if I want to do buttons. And I've also pinned around this edge here. So once it's all nice and secure and I've made sure I've gone through all 3 layers, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to trim off the excess. So what I'll do is I'll just go around the whole edge very carefully and just trim off that excess. So now that I've cut around the whole edge, I will come up in the opening and cut on either side really carefully and around the opening. And once we've finished cutting, let's get sewing. So now I'm going to start sewing where I did my double pins at the top, and I've got my circle opening here, and then I'm just going to follow it all the way around until I get to the other end where I have my double pins again. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2, and I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot. You might want to use your walking foot. Just use whatever you're most comfortable with. So I'm going to start about 1 inch away from my edge there. I'll stitch and I will do a back stitch. When I come to my corner, I'm just going to make sure my needle's down, lift my foot up and turn. And just this little bit will be the most trickiest. So it looks like I'm going to be sewing straight across and missing that, but I'm not. I'm just going to sew right up to where my stitches are. And when I get to that point, then I'll turn. I'll just take that pin out, put my foot down. I'm going to make sure these seams are sitting nicely, so they want to come away from me. So I'm just going to make sure they're sitting nice and flat. Just going to lift my foot up now because it's getting caught on the edge there. And I'm going to stitch right up to my stitches. even though it looks like I'm about to sew right across my tree skirt. Then I'll lift my foot up with my needle down and turn, and I'll do that all the way around this opening. And now I've come to the edge, so I'll just make sure my needle's down again, lift my foot up and turn. And now from this point on, it will be much easier just to stitch around the whole edge. So now I'm coming up to the other end. I'm just going to take those pins out so it's easier to work with. I'm going to sew right up to the edge and turn. And then I'm just going to sew about an inch down and then do a back stitch. And then we're done. So now I'm just going to trim off those corners. So just trim that corner off, making sure I don't touch my stitches. And I will just come along to every corner and just give it a little trim just to help with the bulk for when we turn it right sides out. Okay, and now we're going to turn it right sides out. So I've just found the opening for where I'm going to do the loops for my buttons. That's entirely optional. It's just decorative. If you didn't want to do buttons, then you don't need to leave your opening as wide as this. But I've found my opening and I'm just going to put my hand right in, go all the way around, grab that corner and just pull it all the way through. Then I'm going to get it sitting all nice. I will use my point turner. You could use something blunt like a chopstick and just get those points sitting nice. They're not proper points, but we might as well get them sitting the best we can. And once you've got it sitting all nicely, let's give it a press. So now I'm going to give it a good press and roll out all those edges so it's sitting really nicely. But first I'm going to come to my opening and fold that in by about 1/4 of an inch on both sides and give it a press the best I can. Okay, so once I've done that, I'm just going to go around and make sure on the top and the bottom I've rolled out all these edges, giving it a finger press and getting it sitting how I'd like it. So I'm just going to quickly cover my buttons. I've already done 2, and what I did is I bought a kit for covered buttons and it comes with everything you need, and it also includes the instructions on the back. Now you could just use normal buttons if you'd like, but I really do like using covered buttons for my sewing projects. It comes with a template, and the circle in the middle is to position it if you had, let's say, a design on your fabric. Maybe it was a Christmas tree, so you could make sure it would be sitting in the middle. What we do is we take the template and we draw around the edge. Oh, my pencil's not wanting to work so well. So we draw around the circle and then we just cut that out. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then we take this piece, I forget what it's called, the mold, and we take our circle and we pop that on top. Then we take our button that we're going to cover and we put that on there on top, and then we push that in, and then we can just check what it's going to look like on the other side. So if you were doing a Christmas tree and it was a bit crooked, you could fix it at this stage, but mine's just a polka dot pattern, so it doesn't matter. Then we're going to push in all the little excess fabric around the edge and push that in. Then we take the back piece, it's got the little hook there to sew on as our button, and I'm going to pop that on top, and then I'm going to get the pusher. So then we get the pusher and we put that on top, and then we're going to push down really hard. So you've got to push down really firmly, and you will hear it sort of click into place, and then we push it out and we've got our covered button. If it's not done properly, part of this back piece, you'll see it's still sticking up slightly, but that's how it should look if you've done it correctly. So I'm going to do 3, but like I said, you could just use normal buttons if you'd like. So now I just need to measure how long my loops are going to be that will be sewn into place for my buttonhole to go through. So I'm going to place my buttons about 2.5 inches in from the top and the bottom, and then in the middle. I'm going to just take this braided cord I've got, and it's got kind of a flat side, which I really liked. I found this in Joann's, and I'm just going to roughly guess how long it should be. And we'll leave quite a bit of extra on the inside so that we're definitely catching it when we stitch it, so it's nice and secure. The only thing we really need to remember is that the button needs to be able to fit through the loop, and it wouldn't actually go like that because it's going to, the very far edge of the loop is going to sit on the loop here that we sewed down, so it will be more like that. So bear that in mind. Maybe you think that's a bit too much, so maybe you'd want to make that a little shorter, depending on the size of your button. But the most important thing is where it's sewn securely into place is that your button will fit through that loop. Just remember that. So I think that's going to look quite cute and decorative, so I'm going to cut mine at that length. So let's work out what that is. So that's about 4.5 inches long. So I'll cut 3 at exactly the same length. Then I'm going to just take one. I'm going to take my measuring tape, and I'm going to measure 2.5 inches from the bottom, and that's where I would like to put my first loop. So I'm going to open up my opening, find 2.5 inches and pop that in, and then I'm going to pin it and then check it. Don't worry if it's not all sitting properly, we can fix that a bit later on. So I'll measure that, and that's sitting at exactly 2.5 inches in the middle of my loop. And then if I check my button, that's definitely going to fit through the loop, and if it sits about there, I'm happy with that. So I'll do exactly the same at the top. Then I'm going to find the middle, and then I'll just fold this side piece in half to find the middle, and I'll do it in the middle as well. And I think that looks about the same. What I can do is just check the measurement of it. So it's about 1.5 inches, and that's about 1.5 inches. So that's looking good to me. I'll just do one more at the top. Again, 2.5 inches down. And I'm just making sure it's not twisted. So I'm making sure when I gather it, it's sitting nice and flat. You don't have to be using this braided cord. You could be using anything you like. You might want to use ribbon, or you might want to make something out of fabric. Just whatever you want to use is fine. And that's about 1.5 inches. So now what I'll do is I'm going to pin this opening closed, and then I'm going to sew along this whole edge and then around the whole edge of my tree skirt. And I'll also stitch down either side of my seams on all 8 pieces. And you could do any other quilting you'd like. It's not necessarily going to be washed a lot, so I wouldn't worry too much about how wide you need to be stitching for your batting. So I'm just going to match up those edges and make sure it's pinned and sitting nicely. And now let's head to our sewing machine and finish off our Christmas tree skirt. So now I'm going to sew around the edge, doing a top stitch, which will also close my opening. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2.5 because it is a top stitch. I've decided to put my walking foot on because it is quite a few layers I'm going through. And I'm going to sew at about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, but just in a bit because I do need to catch this opening and close that shut. So I'll start at the top here. I will do a back stitch. So when I come to the corner, I'm just making sure my needle's down, lifting up my foot and turning, and now I'm going to go around the whole outer edge and just do the entire tree skirt now. The last thing we need to do is attach our buttons. So what I've done is I've made sure that my opening is lined up nicely at the top and the bottom, and it's sitting how I want it. And I've actually brought this top piece with the loops over slightly because if anything, I'd rather it closed up more than it needs to be rather than sitting open with my button. So I've got that just a little bit over, and then I'm going to take my button and I'm going to put it down where it's at the end of the loop. Because if we put the button in the middle of the loop, once it's on, it would pull open like that. So I'm just going to check it's all lined up, slightly over a little. So I'm just going to take this little loop and make sure it's at the edge of that loop. And then when I'm happy I've got it in a good spot, I'm just going to feel where it is. And then I'm going to sew that into place by hand. Well, stitch it into place rather. Got to go through quite a few layers. So now that's my first one done. I'm just going to do that for the other 2 buttons and then we're finished. Okay everyone, so now we've finished our Christmas tree skirt. So as you know, I did stitch along the edge of my whole Christmas tree skirt, and I did do the echoing technique down the side of every single seam. You could do as much quilting as you'd like. I just like to keep things simple. Also, don't forget the buttons are optional. You could always just have the opening at the back and just close it up. It's entirely up to you. If you enjoyed this tutorial, it would be amazing if you could hit the like button. It really helps me out. And next week we'll be making a Christmas stocking. Can't wait to see you then. Thank you for watching my videos. If you're enjoying them, please like, subscribe and leave a comment.